Hey everybody, it's Kelly, and we're back at it again at Krispy Kreme. I'm here to talk to you today. Oh boy, this is gonna be a long one. I am so sorry. I'm here to talk to you all today about test-taking strategies. And I want you to keep in mind that this presentation is geared a little bit more towards in-class tests, which I know none of us are taking right now, but there are some useful tips still in it for any type of test that you take, and some specifically for online tests. So let's dive right in. So what goes into a successful test day? And there's some parts to it. There's going into the exam, during the exam, and following up. So I want you to think for a second and ask yourself, what do you do to prepare on the day of an exam? For me, it always looked like trying to get a good night's sleep the day before, making sure I had breakfast or a meal before the exam, but not like right before, just enough time before. Staying hydrated. I tried not to study at least 2 hours before the exam, just because I didn't want to start second guessing the knowledge that I had. And then I always had like a pump up song or a funny video or an inspirational video that I watched just to kind of like bring me some positivity. So what do you do for yourself when you prepare for exam day? So when you're actually going into the exam or sitting down to take the exam at your desk, make sure you have what you need. So, in class exams, you might need a blue book or a ruler, knowing that you have the right pencils, pens, calculator, everything with you so that you don't have to worry about it. Take a sec to reflect on your study habits. If there was some equation or fact that you were a little unsure of, kind of review it in your head. Arrive early, or in the case of online exams, get set up early. Sit kind of in your usual place or a comfortable place for taking that exam, and then breathe. So remember to take a few deep breaths just to kind of get your heart rate down, to feel calm, cool, and collected. And some other tips. So pump yourself up. Remember that this is an opportunity to show what you do know and what you can do. I know that none of us like tests. I don't enjoy them. I have a lot of anxiety around them. But trying to reframe my perspective from something that's negative into something a bit more positive can really help. So a bit of advice that I was given was, don't go into the test thinking that you have 100% and every question you get wrong takes points away. Instead, think about going in the test that you have a 0, and anything you can put down, anything you can add gives you more points. And just that sort of like switch in perspective can take some of the pressure off. And then, like I mentioned, find a theme song, find something that makes you feel energized, pumped up, positive going into that exam. So when you actually sit down to take the exam, a couple things to do right off the bat are, one, brain dump if you can. So if you're able to write down things that you don't want to forget, just do that at the top. Maybe there was an equation, a date, a person, something that you were like holding on to and your brain's going like, don't forget, don't forget, don't forget. Write it down at the top of the page, wherever it is. You can come back to it and have that later. And then your brain isn't like clinging to that bit of information. Stick to what you know at first. This helps build momentum. If you're taking this test under a time constraint, it's really important to get those like questions that you're confident with that take less time done, so that you have more time for the hard questions. Make sure you read the question and the directions fully. There might be a point where they ask for some elaboration. Make sure you give all that they're asking for. And then sort of like have some positive visualization when you need it. So recall your study session. Recall what you were doing while studying. Those things can help jog your memory. So now we're going to kind of dive into the different question types. So the first thing we're going to talk about are multiple choice questions, right? And the most important thing there is looking for ways to eliminate choices. So make sure to read all the options and then cross out ones that are obviously wrong. If it's something where you're kind of like plugging in a term or something, check for grammatical fit. That's a good way to eliminate some as well. Skip questions and skim the exams if possible. So depending on how you're taking these exams online, make sure you understand if you can go back and forth between questions or if you can't. You don't want to skip a question if there's no way of returning to it. So see how that software kind of works and see what works best. Most online exams do allow you to go back. So just double check. So true-false questions. There's a couple of tips. It's kind of hard with these ones, but keep in mind that conditional language, so language like sometimes, often, generally, seldom, and some are usually true, right? They leave room for a lot of different cases. While unconditional language, so terms like always, only, invariably, entirely, are usually false, but you need to be really careful when it comes to math tests. So these rules don't always apply to math exams, and in those cases, you just need to be you need to have a firm understanding of what those concepts are and break down what's going on. And pay attention, again, to the directions. So some exams will have you explain why something is true or false, so don't lose out on those points by skipping that portion of the question. So one thing to keep in mind with true and false questions is that all parts must be true for the statement to be true. So one thing that you can try and do is rewrite the statement to eliminate negatives or double negatives and just kind of break it down. So an example of this is the sun will never not rise in the east, right? And we have that never not, that double negative. So we can get rid of those and say the sun will rise in the east. And you took this confusing statement and made it a little more clear for yourself, and now you can see that it's true. So if possible, try and do some of those rewording things, so long as you still maintain the nature of the question. So fill in the blank. Determine if there's a theme, first and foremost, because that'll help jog your memory for sort of like where you're at in your knowledge base. If possible, skim the rest of the exam for like little tidbits that might help jog your memory again. Check for grammatical fit. Make sure whatever word you're plugging in makes sense in the sentence. And then make sure that you fill that blank space with something. So just try words. Even if you know that it's not right, throw something in there to see if it helps kind of like jog your memory of what it could be. So matching questions, I don't see these a ton on tests, but some instructors still do use them. Again, read the instructions. If you do have a matching section, it's a really nice place to get some points, and you can use the power of elimination here. So make all of the matches that you are confident with first, and then start to kind of sort through the rest of them, because there'll be some clear things where like, okay, well, this word obviously doesn't mean 5 of the 6 of the things, so it must mean this other one. So make sure that, if possible, connect all items. Now, sometimes they give you more words than there are definitions, or vice versa, so check for directions. So some general test-taking tips for math and science exams. Show all of your work, and I realize that's a little hard online, but if you have something where you're like given a take-home exam and you're expected to like scan it in or send photos of your work, make sure to show all of that work. And watch for sneaky errors. So these are things like units of measure, negative and positives. Double check your work before you move on to make sure you didn't drop a negative somewhere. When I tutored math, that was the most common thing that I saw for a lot of folks. And then units of measure. So let's say you're taking a physics exam and it asks for a volume, and you get something in like just plain centimeters. That can give you a clue that something went wrong somewhere, and you can go back and check your work to figure out where that was. Try and tackle some of the harder problems last, especially if you're under a time limit. So giant story problems might be a good thing to save till the end so that you can go through and get some of those other points first. And when in doubt, write your process out in words. So if you aren't sure what comes next in a problem, try and write out where you know that the problem should go. that at least lets your instructor know that you have an idea about how to solve it. It's just some of the algebra or some of the like work in there got a little messy. So for math and science, keep in mind that partial credit is real and it can save your life, which sounds dramatic. But it is a really critical thing that can help boost your grade, just getting little points of it. And I know that for some grading systems, they get like automatically graded by computer software. So they'll kind of be like all or nothing. If that's the case, when you go back and review your answers, you can always send a note to your instructor saying like, hey, I realized that I didn't get the whole problem correct, but I feel like I got the first half. Can I get some partial credit for that? Never shy away from asking those questions. So when it comes to essay writing, which a lot of online tests have, make sure that you're answering the question that's being asked. So underline the key words, kind of look for some space where you can write your initial thoughts. Make sure to open with a strong statement and be sure to write something. So don't just leave a huge essay question blank. If you're under a time crunch and you don't have the time to like fill out paragraphs of info, give us a bullet pointed list. Tell us some of your main points that you would incorporate into the argument. Because again, it's showing your instructor that you really do know what's going on. You just don't have the time to fill it out. And if you run into that issue after you hit submit on that test, send them an email. Let them know like, hey, I only wrote a bullet pointed list for number 7 because I was running out of time, but I'm really confident that I know that material. Here's what I would have written. It's not guaranteed that you're going to get points for that, but it is a good thing to show your instructor, so I recommend trying that. So here's sort of like an essay question. Compare and contrast 3 test-taking strategies. Is there a strategy that works best for you? Why or why not? So they're asking quite a few questions, so we want to kind of break those down. So you want to compare and contrast 3 things. That's number 1. You want to say what strategy is the best for you and why. So identifying like, hey, this one is the one that I enjoy, and here's why, here's an example. So really making sure that you're hitting every single part of the question. So when it comes to taking tests online, there's a couple of things to keep in mind. So one at home is trying to ensure you have a solid internet connection. And I realize that that's not always possible. So this might involve some work with kind of coordinating with family. Maybe everyone's working from home. See if you can schedule out a time to have everybody else off the internet. I realize that that's not possible for everybody, but it is something to try. Reserve a quiet and clean space. So don't try and take the test on your bed, sit somewhere with good light, with space for kind of like writing out your thoughts. Give yourself that space to do things. Make sure to enable pop-ups. Sometimes tests open in a new window, and if you have any sort of like ad blocker, it may be preventing you from seeing those. And then try and record your answers on a separate sheet of paper or take a screenshot of them, just so you have record in case there's some question about how you entered it or what your answer was, or if something happens with your internet connection, anything like that. And when you're taking online tests on campus, make sure that you know testing center hours and to bring any required ID. So some more tips, understand the rules and the format. So is there a time limit? What sort of resources are allowed? How are they monitoring how you're taking this test? So really dive into those requirements and those things that go into this test. Make sure you read instructions for entering responses. So a couple of examples, some math tests might require the answer to be in a certain format. So this was really common in like Math 108 and 143, where they would say, we want your answer to be in interval notation, or we want your answer to be in set notation. So knowing that that might be something that comes up. And essay questions may require a specific citation. So it's not a test, but my reflections that I give for this course, if you cite something, I require it to be an MLA. So knowing what sort of requirements there are. If you can, save as you go. This is especially good in case there's any issues with internet or power or anything like that. And if you can, take a screenshot of the submission screen for your own records. So if there's ever any question that you didn't get it in or you didn't get it in on time, try and take that screenshot so that you have proof of like, no, hey, I did it at this time. Here's the paper trail for it. It might seem a little like over anxious to do that, but it is a really good practice to have. So a couple like kind of summary key test taking tips. Build momentum, skim the exam when possible to help find answers. And I'm not saying you're going to find the entire answer in another question, but you might find a phrase or an image that helps you recall the material you're thinking about. Use the exam to demonstrate what you know, and remember to breathe. So if you're starting to feel a little panicked during the exam, take a second, take a good deep breath, and then keep going. I'm really sorry if the sound went funky there. My microphone just kind of fell over. So keep in mind that even though we're online and we're all away, academic dishonesty is still a thing that goes on. If you have any questions about this, you can ask me, you can ask the Dean of Students, you can ask your instructor, what do they consider academic dishonesty? What does that look like to them? It's not something that I want you to be like terribly fearful of, because if you're doing your own work and you're citing when you use a source, you're probably going to be just fine. But if you do have questions, always reach out. It's better to ask beforehand, and instructors really prefer that because it shows that you're invested in doing good work and doing work that's your own. So just check that out and keep that in mind. So after you take an exam, you might just be like, oh my gosh, what just happened? What did I just go through? So how do you feel after taking an exam? Reflect on that. For me, I always felt relieved because at least it was over. If it wasn't a great exam, I usually felt kind of bad. So I would try and do something to like raise my spirits. And one rule that I had for myself was I wouldn't talk about an exam until at least 2 days later. So when I say that, I wouldn't talk with people in my class about that exam. And that's because a lot of people that I was in class with like to compare answers right afterwards, and be like, oh, what'd you get? Oh no, I got this. I think my answer was right. And all that did for me was it just made me feel worse. So I would tell people in my class, I'd be like, hey, nope, I'm not going to talk about it until 2 days later, because that gave me time to kind of accept like, hey, some of your answers might not have been right, and that's okay. So set whatever limits or boundaries you need for yourself. So how do you feel after the exam? Find some time post-exam to decompress. Keep in mind that one test will not seal your fate. It's an opportunity to learn from some of those mistakes, right? Learning is a process. It takes time and it takes failure. So there are going to be exams that you don't do great on, and trying to frame those in the context of, okay, I can learn from this to do better in the next one is a much more positive way to look at it. So the other thing that I want to let all of you know is that anxiety is very common. So test anxiety affects 25 to 40% of college students' experiences, and there are resources to help. Even now, when we're not all on campus, the Center for Disability Access and Resource, or CDAR, and the Counseling and Testing Center, or the CTC, are both still available to help you. For some folks, they need an accommodation, and that might look like just having a little extra time to take the exam, or taking it in a quiet place, or under different circumstances. And those things can get worked out with CDAR. And as far as like managing that anxiety around the test and finding tools to help sort of mitigate it while you're in the exam, I highly recommend talking to the folks at the Counseling and Testing Center. They're amazing. Some simple ways to kind of manage anxiety while you're in the exam is doing structured breathing. So that looks like really intentional breathing, where you breathe in for a certain time limit and breathe out for a certain time limit. So it's usually like 5 seconds in, 5 seconds out. And that can help slow your heart rate down. Normally when we're in class, I have everyone try it with me, but we're gonna do it over the internet. So take a deep breath, exhale, and I'm going to count to 5. You're going to breathe in. I'm going to count to 6. You're going to hold it. I'm going to count to 7, and you're going to breathe out. I'm going to do that twice, okay? So deep breath, and in, 2, 3, 4, 5, hold, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, out, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, in, 2, 3, 4, 5, hold, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, out, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay, you can breathe normal now. If you didn't do that with me, that's okay. You just listen to me count a couple times. But I recommend trying structured breathing. It's a really useful thing to kind of slow your heart rate down a little bit when you're feeling panicked. I use it all the time for everything in my life, so I recommend it. And then reframing or revisualizing your situation. So trying to restructure how you're feeling in a positive light. It's another good thing to try. And then part of your follow-up with an exam involves returning to your preparation. So contact your professor and TA. Discuss resources and study strategies and evaluate some of those successes and failures. So what did you feel good about and what didn't you feel good about? Like maybe there was a particular type of question that you were just confused on and you want to gain some insight on how to do better on those questions later. You can meet with a tutor and SI pass leader. These are folks who have been in the class, so they know what it feels like. And you can learn from their perspective about being a student in that class, and then reach out to other resources. So whether it's friends, a community organization, counseling and testing center, CEDAR, your advisor, myself as an academic coach, whoever you want to reach out to get some more help and advice on taking tests, make sure to do that for yourself. So keep in mind that failure isn't final, right? Practice self-compassion. So try not to judge yourself for past shortcomings, and instead focus on how you feel when you've mastered the material. Adopt the proper mindset. It isn't a failure, it's a problem to be solved. So just because you did poorly on one test doesn't mean that you're going to do poorly on everything. There's some bit of information that needs to be firmed up, that needs to be studied a little bit, and that's okay. That's something that you can do. And define what success means to you and let that be your guide. So maybe you're holding yourself to a standard of like, I have to get 100%, but is that really what success is for you? Most of the time, success for me is an 85% or better. And even that's kind of like a high bar to reach sometimes. But considering how that, or like defining that as my success, made it feel a lot better when I got the 85, right? I wasn't suddenly hard on myself for getting a B. I was like, okay, you hit your goal, great. Anything above and beyond that is just gravy. It's just better. And then cultivate a successful identity. So you are not a failure. Just because you failed a test does not make you as a person a failure. You are a person who has a fixable problem. A successful person has a balance of success and failures. Both are valuable. So I learned the most in college and in grad school from getting a D in a class, getting 30% on a lot of tests, having a couple breakdowns over having those 30%. But it did genuinely make me a better person because before that, I hadn't really dealt with failure in regards to something that I really loved doing. And it was really challenging and really difficult. And for a while, I did feel like I was a failure as a person. But working really actively to try and reshape that opinion of myself helped a lot better. Helped me a lot to feel better. And it helped in other areas of my life. So that when something didn't go so well in some other aspect of life, I knew how to deal with it. I knew that like, okay, this is not you as a person. This is just something that didn't go right, and that's okay. And there are ways around it. And as someone who was put on academic probation in grad school and had a real rough time of it and did not enjoy it, I still got a job. I'm still getting paid to do something. I'm still just fine. So it's not the end of the world, even if it does feel like it in the moment. And it's okay for it to feel like that. Just after you have that sort of like panic feeling, take a second to reevaluate where you're at and realize that you are still a wonderful and valuable human being, regardless of what any test says. So that's all I have for test taking tips. Again, I apologize if it feels a bit more like this would help when we're in class. But I do think there are some things that work regardless of where you're at. So with that, I hope you all have a lovely day. It's been sunny, so if you can, enjoy some of that sunshine. Yeah, I'll see y'all or talk to y'all later. Bye-bye.